What do you think is the most important part of melding music with visual media?
I think it varies for every project. I think the role that music plays in any given narrative changes with how you want to tell a story. Sometimes it's all about the emotional content. Sometimes it's all about, not playing any music at all. A lot of times there shows no score, all songs, and that does a thing. And then some no songs, all score, some no music at all. I think that music can play a really, really important role in doing anything that a filmmaker and a maker of any sort of narrative wants to do. There isn't one answer to that question, is what I'm trying to say.
I'll just jump in very quickly because I will just say this. I'm a fan of each of the gentlemen that are up here. And I for me, being a producer, being this hybrid, but really loving when I can put on that music supervisor hat, it's really about helping to tell the story. And I think that as a music supervisor, when you can select music that really connects with the fabric of what a great composer is creating, that's the beauty of it. And so I think music, when you pick music, it should not just be about sticking a song in. It should help tell the story and connect with what a composer is creating.
When do you guys find you work best? Like, is it like when you get the script first, or do you want to see the scenes or like the full episode?
I'll jump in. Kind of on to what we were saying before, just about it being such a visual thing for me. I know I have a general sense when I first read the script for 13, just the pilot, I was able to do the tape theme started messing with Hannah's theme too. But for me personally, I'm such a visual person. I just take it in that I really respond to visuals. And I think I could be saying something different in some years, but I feel like I need the visuals in front of me to be able to do it.
Anyone else?
I'll just add to it, just in the unique role that I'm in. I love the fact that I am able to be in the writer's room and pop in and also get the outlines and start visually mapping out where the music goes and sharing those ideas with the writer or with the showrunner. And at the same time, there were moments that I would get very excited and I would call Harvey Mason and say, I'm going to be looking for this track. I'm going to send it your way, because he was my executive music producer who I worked very closely with in his studio. But also if I would call Joe, our show composer, and say, when you see this, just be expecting, this moment is going to make you feel this way. I know you'll feel this way, but I'm excited, so let's talk once you get the scene. So I love being able to get the script or get the outline and really sit with the characters and sit with the scene and pick from there.
Yeah, and I feel like I work in the same way. Like I start talking to the filmmaker at the outline stage and really want to try to help craft what the tone of the storytelling mechanism is going to be. With Star Trek, I got the first script and I started talking to the producers and I just went and wrote the theme. With Fargo, I got a script every season. I would get the first script and Noah and I would talk about the show, and I'd go and I'd write like an hour's worth of music for building themes for the characters, because I like you, I like to get into the what the characters could be, not necessarily what they end up becoming. And then you see it, and it could all change, obviously. So it's sort of a mix of all of those things.
Yeah, I'm more about the visual. I've yet to write anything from reading a script. I mean, I'll start getting some ideas, but I don't know. It just seems like, the script, obviously it's got a lot of information there, but the journey from the script to the screen is such a long, winding road, and what ends up there could be very different from what's on the page. There could be not that much on the page, and then what's on the screen is like this whole world. So I tend to wait, but like I said, I got that horror story script waiting for me tonight. Maybe I'll
we'll check in with
read
you
it
tomorrow
in front of the piano or something tonight and see what happens.
So when you guys get scenes with temp music, how much does that affect your work? Like, Jeff, did you get a scene with old Star Trek music?
I think that the conversation about temp music is one that composers have all the time. With Star Trek, it wasn't really a problem because they were temping with some music that I had given them to temp with, and then some from the Star Trek movies, and so it knew what it was going to be. But when you're with a show like Fargo or Legion, for instance, we don't temp. There's no temp. We watch it with no music, and then we decide where the music's going to go. Then there are other times where they craft a temp score, and that's what they want, and then it's very restricting for a composer to be sort of stuck needing to satisfy the thing that the temp score satisfies, and then they end up temping with like Interstellar or
just Hans Zimmer.
Hans Zimmer score, and you're like, what? What am I supposed to do?
You have to be Hans Zimmer.
I can't do that, right? So it can be quite frustrating, and then you just kind of need to find your way through it. And it's different. It's different in television, because the speed is at this breakneck speed that you have to work at. So a temp score helps the editor sort of craft their edit, and then hopefully we can just sort of strip it out and not have to deal with it. But then you get to the point where you have 7 seasons of a show, and I'm sure they're maybe temping with music of yours that you go, oh, I remember that, and then okay, I can kind of do that. I mean, that happens too.
Can I add to that? I think that for me, I would always try to be mindful of the position that you guys are in. And so I would try to give the textures right out the gate that I felt would hit a home run with whatever the composer was going to create on the show. And, for this show, because it was based on true real events, it was really about tapping into as authentic of the moments as possible. I would spend time with Greg Kading, whose book the series was originally based on, to really talk to him about what the sound was that, drove him every day as he prepared himself to go either out on the beat at the beginning of his career or as he tackled this very complicated, controversial case. What did he connect with as a person? And so if I could give that and that palette to the editors and just stock it up and stack it up out the gate, I felt that it helped what the composer had to create.
Anyone else have strong feelings about temp music?
To me, it's a blessing and a curse. And, the blessing is that there can be, if it's a good picture editor that's put the temp in and they've cut to it, there's a lot of good information to get from it. There can be a tempo. There can be like where a big modulation should happen or where it should hit here or hit there. There can be some really nice information there. And if I know that I have the freedom to just use some of that information and then write my music with that information in it, that's not going to sound like the temp, that's great. The curse is when, they think the temp is like the best idea that could ever be in that scene. And so then
you got Hans Zimmer too.
Yeah. So,
and trust me, that always works. Put the Hans Zimmer score in. Oh yeah, that works. Well, yeah.
But now we have to pay for it.
Yeah, to also back that in terms of the information side of it, I feel like sometimes the temp, if it's put in by the editor, they're doing it particularly, or even the music editor, if they're jumping in there and helping out, there might be little key points where there's a switch, where something happens. There's a really particular kind of like key thing in that cue in that scene. And they might not be doing the right thing at all, but it really helps to know like, when this happens here, they're helping out. They know exactly what the showrunner is hoping for right here. There needs to be some type of switch. I'm going to do it better or do my own version of it or what kind of I think should happen here. But at least that information that they put in there helps a lot. And it does help a lot when, like on season 3 for the other show, then they're temping with your stuff. And for 13, they ended up temping a lot more with my stuff. And luckily, the showrunner for 13 was never tied to one piece of temp that was in either season. Usually it was just like, something like this, but do your thing, which is, I'm sure, not always the case, and I think I lucked out.
So what was the worst case of writer's block each of you got, or when you couldn't find the correct song or piece of music?
Right, yeah, I've been asked that a lot recently about writer's block, and I mean, for me, like I was saying before about the motivation of the deadline, like that's a big cure for writer's block. Like when it has to get done, you can't have writer's block.
You just write the hive.
You have to write it. Like there's not a choice, But then a great tool for me is that I like to jump around. So maybe between shows, but even within one episode or a couple episodes of a show, there's numbers of pieces of music to be written, and so if I get stuck on one, I just jump to another one, and it gives me, one, I get to kind of go around the writer's block, and two, I get to come back to that cue with fresh ears, and I'll know almost immediately whether the idea was working that I was stuck on, or maybe it's not, and so jumping around and tight deadlines are that's how I battle writer's block.
Yeah, I'd say the same thing. I'd say tight deadlines definitely help push you to need to just do it. But the thing about episodic television, when you're working against the time clock, your first idea is usually your only idea, and you don't really get to sit and ruminate about it like we would if we were just writing a piece of music just for the sake of writing a piece of music. So that in and of itself means you have to just do it, get it done, and move on to the next. So if you can't do that, moving on to one around it and sort of detouring and then coming back to it helps, or jumping to another project or whatever to try to shake it. But the idea of writer's block is almost non-existent because you simply can't have writer's block. You simply must write. So in the end, sometimes you end up with something that's not as great as you'd hoped it would be. And then you will hopefully get a note on it and then redo it later.
For me, there were a couple of instances. I think it's really hard, and it's great, but it's also very challenging when you're working with one of my executive producers, and particularly Anthony Hemingway, who is really wonderful, but also knows music really well and really knows what he wants, and sort of satisfying what he wants. No, give me more. So it's that constant pressure push of, no, I want a different sound, and you think you've given something really, really brilliant. There was an episode where there was a bank heist scene, and it was, very, very long, and nothing was clicking. And then when I thought I had it there was a classic OJ's song, not For the Love of Money, but going kind of against the grain. And then it was going to be like $1 million or something crazy. And then I had so many other roadblocks. And then I found this obscure go-go sound out of DC, Chuck Brown and the Soul Searchers. And so when those percussions came on, it was like nobody was expecting it. And everybody at first was like, well, what's this going to be? We fell in love with the other. So it's always getting people to fall in love with the new sound. And luckily they did, because I was able to constantly push myself with that pressure and the pressure of the deadlines. But I would say the challenging for me having, I would say, any kind of block was in the final episode, because that last episode really had to sum this whole big true thing up. And Tupac's death and just the magnitude of all of that. And so it lended itself at first to, after coming out of Vincent, how do you back that up? And so there was a song that I'd heard a track from one of my producers, and the track was awesome, and it had these children singing on it. And I gave Wavy an opportunity with the studio support to finally write his own rap lyrics, and he really paid tribute to Biggie and Tupac, and it was as if he were the spirit singing to them about their friendship and about a brotherhood. And that ended up being the thing that was able to kind of punctuate what we had worked so hard for all season long.
He wrote it himself.
He wrote it himself.
Brendan, how about you?
I agree with the TV thing in particular. 13 was an episode every week. And I had Billions every 2 weeks on top of that. So you definitely, one of the biggest things I've learned from it, coming from, like I had mentioned before, just working on my own albums and when I'm working on my own album, I can spend 7 hours on a kick drum. And that's totally normal, if maybe a bit crazy, but it's also, it's like,
That's a long
it's
time
something
on
you
a
can,
kick
something you
drum.
can do just to really work with it, you know,
Be a
add
good kick drum.
yeah, totally. If not, start again, another 7 hours. But with this, you definitely do not have that opportunity. You can't spend that kind of time on a kick drum. And one of the best things that I've learned so far from doing this, which has been so helpful to me, is really getting out of my own way. And part of it is allowing your pride to kind of like sit to the side and knowing that you got to do the best thing for the scene, for the project, as opposed to like, and it kind of goes back to what I was saying before, just for me personally, of doing stuff with, if I'm doing it preemptively before I actually see the project, then sometimes I could take those ideas and try to cram them into something that might not actually work for the scene, just because my pride might be attached to that idea. And so I feel like something that's helped me in not getting to that writer's block has been putting the pride to the side, going with what's there, and then not allowing myself to get lost in minutia of crazy, microscopic, 7-hour kick drum stuff.
That's for later when you're done with the season.
Yeah, totally.
So is there a genre of music or a show that you haven't worked with yet that you would love to do?
Sci-fi. Any type of anything hyper fantasy oriented.
Star Trek.
Star Trek. Yeah.
I was going to say, somehow I don't get to say sci-fi.
But not even, I guess sci-fi is for me, I feel like anything in the fantasy section, that side of the bookstore, anything that's in fantasy, anything that just is hyper surreal, I would like to work on.
A musical. Ooh. Yeah, I'd really like to spend more time in the studio. I love working with composers. I love working with music producers, and I'd really like to spend more time creating the original songs, tracks. Yeah, I love it. And so, yeah, a musical.
A good story is that's the thing. So working with someone who can really, really interestingly come up with characters that have that are empathetic and that you can be empathetic towards, I think draws me to that kind of a thing. So sci-fi tends to do that. They tend to, because they're these, very fantastical stories, that's why I'm drawn to that. But a straight, like, serious drama, which somehow I always tend to get into sci-fi or this drama that has a twist, like Fargo, which is sort of a very dark comedic drama. But the only time that I was really able to do something that was really, really just dramatic was The Night Of, and that was some of the most fun I'd had.
Mac, anything?
Well, I mean, yeah, I'm interested in sci-fi too. I mean, it's like I like a sort of a particular type of science fiction that they don't make a lot of it, Like I want something serious that's for adults, that's like intelligent, that's maybe a little bit hard to understand. Like there's been this whole, all this young adult stuff that's kind of sci-fi, but not really. So yeah, that's something I'm looking out for.
Just tell Ryan.
So yeah, maybe.
Well, I want to thank all of you for coming out tonight. It was great speaking with all of you, and thank you everyone here.
Thank you so much.